Okay, so good afternoon once again. I think you were all here during the 5-minute session, so I will not introduce myself. This is a presentation covering one of the very first research projects that I was that I developed as part of my master's program, and it was a research developed along with Professor Mauro and Professor Renato, both from the IT management group. Okay, and it does have its limitations, but we thought it might be a good or interesting material to bring up here, not only because of the research findings themselves, but also or especially the research method that was utilized, combining methods that until then were not very or not much utilized here in our group. Okay. So the main concepts that are being investigated here are communication, and especially communication in virtual project teams. Okay, so by that time we used to have evidences that, especially when you have projects developed in virtualized contexts with people dispersed across different regions, there will be a twofold phenomenon. First, the project manager would have a increased need for controlling or coordinating information because of the dispersed context. And on the other hand, the team members themselves would rely on the project manager because they don't see each other, they don't have easy access to communicate with each other. Okay, so because of that, we had the proposal that perhaps this particular scenario would have an impact on the communication pattern between those team members. Okay, and that was the purpose of this research. So the research problem can be translated with the following question. Does centralized project management practices affect the communication network of virtual project teams, and if so, how? Okay, and to deal with that question, we selected the social network analysis techniques to analyze or investigate the communicative interactions among the members of the virtual team being analyzed. Okay, so it was a case study from an international IT project that we select, and we applied social network analysis to help with the investigation. So this was the basic methodology. So as I mentioned, we selected a IT project, an international IT project, and it was this project was selected because not only it was a large project, but because of its size and because it was developed in a multi-sourced environment, it required the participation of many different companies. Okay, so because of that, we used to have not only one project manager. Of course, we had the main project manager responsible for the overall delivery, but the engagement that was required from third-party teams also required the participation of additional project managers responsible for what we call sub-deliveries for the main one. Okay, so that was a scenario particularly interesting for us because that could emphasize even more the aspect of centralizing the information. So the data collection was made by contacting one of the members of this international IT project that we had access, And we asked him for all the emails he had stored during the project implementation, and we expanded all these emails by looking at their attachments and their threads, original threads, and we extracted all the senders and receivers information from each message. And with that, we constructed a matrix that was submitted into the software USINET by Analytic Technologies. And with that, we were able to extract some quantitative measurements that I described here. Okay, so for those who are not very familiar with the social network analysis, I will briefly cover some of the measurements that we used. So from a individual team member perspective, I can have two types of measures. One is called centrality, that measures how many interactions that individual was capable of doing in the project team, divided by the total possible number of interactions. Okay, so that measure tells me something about the importance of that particular individual in the project team. Okay, and a secondary measure is what we call betweenness. Okay, so it has some similarity with the previous measure, but here betweenness measure considering the total numbers of interactions between two actors, in how many of those interactions my particular individual was in between. Okay, so that measure represents the capability of a specific individual to increase or intermediate information between two actors. Okay, so if we look at these two graphics here, I would have, for example, Richard. Richard was a person. It's a fictitious name, by the way. So Richard has a high centrality because it has many interactions with other team members. On the opposite side, I have Jim, a very low centrality individual. And here I have Susan as a high betweenness actor because she intermediates interactions between many other team members. So you can see that usually, with very few exceptions, centrality and betweenness have a similar pattern. Okay, but they are conceptually different. And on the network side, I have two other measures: density and centralization. Density basically measures or is calculated considering the total number of possible interactions, or should I say the number of interactions developed in my network divided per the total number of possible interactions. Okay, so it measures how dense my network is. If I have a high number for density, that means many interactions were developed. Okay, and centralization measures how uniform my network is. It specifically it measures how different the centrality values for the individuals are, how uniform they are or not. Okay, so a high centralization value means I may have few highly central individuals, but many others not so central. Okay, so bear in mind that what we were looking for here is not eliminating the central individuals, but we want to avoid having just few central individuals. Okay, ideally we should pursue a communication network that has as many as possible high central individuals, because from a knowledge transfer perspective or from a social interaction perspective, that is the desirable standard. Okay. So, for example, here, this is a dense network, I should say, but this is not a dense network. Here I have many interactions between two actors. Here I don't have it. Okay. So with that method, we were able to elaborate this diagram, which cannot be easily read in this picture. But anyhow, every square here, little square, represents one actor from the project team or one team member. Okay, and the ties associating two of those nodes represent the communicative interaction developed between them, and the thickness of these ties represent how frequent the communication was between those two ties. Okay, so one of the first elements that we can see here, or behaviors, is that one project manager from the infrastructure group was centralizing information for many of the infrastructure resources. And on the other side, the project manager from the application team was not only exchanging information with the other project manager, but he was also centralizing information for the application team in overall. Okay. On the other side, you have support teams with no formal project leader, where the engagement was much more uniform without, depending on a single point of distribution. Okay, but that was not the overall purpose of the research. We were trying to extract numerical values to give us an idea of how much dense or not the network was. And these were the values we extracted. So considering the network, so as a whole, I'm not talking about individuals, the density value obtained was 80%. That means only 80% of all possible interactions between the actors or the team members were established, which is a very low value. And this was another challenge for this research, because we did not have pre-established values to compare with by that time. Okay, so we went by the total value, or the how can I say, absolute value for establishing or extracting insights. Okay. Secondly, I can see by the centralization values that these are not low values. Okay, they go from 0 to 100, so they are not low values, and that means potentially we have central actors on this network. Okay, if this value was low, that means the centrality degrees among all team members is very uniform, which is not the case. Okay. So with that evidence, we need to know then who are the central actors in this network. And for that, we analyzed at the team member level what was the centrality degree of each actor, and also what was his betweenness degree. Okay, and these are the two tables that summarize these results. Okay, you can see on both of them that there is a operations technician listed at the top. Okay, and that's the major bias of this research, because we were only able to extract the data from a single resource. Okay, so if we ask a person about the emails he has about a certain project, there is a big chance that he will only have emails where he was addressed to. Okay, but anyhow, extracting the attachments and the threads helped us decrease this bias, but we understand it's a major one. Okay, so if you look at the next values, you can see on both sides you have the project manager, okay? Not only the infrastructure project manager, but also the application. And the same happens with the betweenness degree. And these values are much higher than the other team members, okay? So that tells us the most central individuals in this network were the two project managers, okay? So these were the main research findings. Going back to our original research question, how does centralized project management practices affect the network communication in virtual context? Well, we usually have few central actors, okay? And that results on more centralized and low connected network topologies. And again, we are looking at this topic from a knowledge management perspective, where it is desirable to have as much connections as possible. Be aware that we are looking at a virtual context where establishing connections is already a challenge. So by utilizing centralized project management practices, we are increasing the challenge for knowledge management, okay? A second item is there is a higher centrality and betweenness for the project manager. And this is a result of the emphasis these team members are giving to the project manager for controlling information under the virtual context. And again, this is in line with our initial proposal that both from a project manager perspective and from a team member perspective, they both would rely on a central individual for distributing information. Okay. A interesting finding here, and unfortunately this is only by looking at the graphics and the centrality degrees, we were able to realize that whenever you don't have a formal project leaders, so the small support teams that were engaged, they presented more actors with similar centrality degrees, which is the desirable situation. We don't want to have too many discrepancies between the centrality degrees, because we want everyone to be engaged. Okay, so without a formal project leader, these teams have no choice instead of engaging everyone, because they didn't have a single point of contact to help them get in touch with other teams. So, but that creates, we understand that creates another challenge, because how can we live with such organizational form at the same time we don't increase the risk for project control and coordination, which is in reality the concern from the project manager or the project team itself. Okay, so how to deal with these two elements is perhaps the challenge that we propose for future projects. Okay, and that was it in a nutshell. For those interested in looking at this research in more detail, as Professor was mentioning at the beginning, this research was published in the International Conference of Production Research in 2013. So if you access the proceedings, the article will be there. And these are the three authors and their respective email addresses in case of any questions. Okay, that's it.